In the post-Reconstruction era, presidents began to retreat from their responsibility and power to protect African Americans from lynching and police brutality, and instead expanded their authority and reorganized federal law enforcement to maintain episodic law and order, also known as street-level crime. They did this to combat the sale and distribution of alcohol and drugs, as well as prostitution. During this time period, presidents such as Theodore Roosevelt unilaterally created the FBI, and Hardin and Coolidge created, staffed, and reorganized the Bureau of Prohibition. Congress delegated the president additional powers as well. Starting in 1890, presidents could prosecute anyone using the mail to carry out lottery schemes. Prior to 1910, prostitution was legal, but it incentivized sex trafficking of European women. So Congress passed the White Slave Act, the nation's first anti-sex trafficking law. Prior to 1914, drugs were legal, and you could buy cocaine in a syringe from a Sears catalog. Now the president received the authority to combat drug distribution, and by 1919, you could be arrested by the federal government for stealing an automobile and taking it over state lines or violating the Prohibition Amendments. Presidents also directed and oversaw the prosecution of mob leaders. President Hoover oversaw the investigation and prosecution of Al Capone, which led to a 22-count indictment and an 11-year prison sentence. All while this was going on, a significant number of African Americans were being lynched across the nation, particularly in the South. Some of this violence was more egregious than others, such as the lynching of Mary Turner, who was on the left here hung right side up, but was actually hung upside down, had her baby cut out of her womb, stomped to death, and then she was burned alive. Jesse Washington, who's in the middle here, was dragged out of the courtroom, stabbed repeatedly, had his genitals cut off, and then he was burned alive. Race riots also took place in places like Springfield, Illinois, and Tulsa, Oklahoma, on Black Wall Street, where the police helped to kill hundreds of African Americans and destroy millions of dollars of property. And civil rights organizations, starting with Ida B. Wells, the NAACP, petitioned presidents for several decades to specifically use the color of law and conspiracy provisions to protect African Americans from racial violence and police brutality. They would not get a response until the Civil Rights era, specifically under Franklin Roosevelt, who expanded the president's authority over episodic law and order to combat organized crime and juvenile delinquency, and structural law and order to protect African Americans from police brutality and lynching. He unilaterally created the Civil Rights Division and tasked it with specifically protecting African Americans using the color of law and conspiracy provisions. He also directed the prosecution of numerous police officers and correctional officers, often receiving personal updates from the Justice Department. All throughout the Civil Rights era, however, you will find presidents that are willing to expand their authority to fight organized crime, use grants and rehabilitation policies to fight street-level and juvenile crime. However, they would hesitate to use the military, law enforcement, or the conspiracy or color of law provisions to protect African Americans. Harry Truman, for example, was accused of entertaining organized crime figures at the Blair House, according to this internal FBI document dated March 28, 1951. On March 29, 1951, Truman reminds the public that he is directing thousands of organized crime cases across the nation. Dwight Eisenhower likewise did the same thing. He ordered the investigation of notable real estate developers, including the father of President Trump, Fred C. Trump, for their alleged role in carrying out a scam against veterans and the Federal Housing Administration. He also, through executive orders, released their tax returns to a Senate investigative committee. John F. Kennedy was very aggressive in addressing the rise of organized crime and also focused on juvenile delinquency by implementing crime prevention and rehabilitation programs. However, Kennedy and Eisenhower did little to use the color of law and conspiracy provisions to protect African American civil rights, Little Rock, Arkansas being the exception. When Dwight Eisenhower sent the troops in to protect African American students as they integrated Little Rock Central High, he cited Title 10, Sections 332 and 333 as his authority to do so, which happened to be the same exact authority President Fillmore cited when he sent troops into Boston to recover the fugitive slaves that escaped.